to prisoners. I call for you cultivation of strength in the dark gardening in the vertigo cold, in the hot paralysis, under the wolves and coyotes of particular silences, where it is dry. I call for you cultivation of victory over long blows that you want to give and blows you are going to get, over what wants to crumble you down, to sicken you. I call for you cultivation of strength to heal and enhance in the non-cheering dark, in the many, many matins after, in the chalk and choke. Big up, Gwendolyn Brooks. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mir, ni hao, buenos dias, buenos tardes, heseche, akwaba, welcome. What up, though? This is Convo with Zuri G. I am Zuri G, aka Peter Johansson OCC. Today's conversation is with Sister Arlet, who is the director of the Twing Student Center at Case Western Reserve University. She and I are colleagues, brethren for over a decade. We meet at Case over a decade ago, and we talk about that in the convo. But she regularly gives counsel and advice and guidance and interaction to students at the university, and is a very compassionate, intelligent woman who has the intelligence and the empathy to help people, and particularly young people, find grounding, find path, find inspiration in people's walk in this life. So she and I have many fantastic conversations through the years, and particularly because she gives advice and guidance for people, for students of many different backgrounds. That's one of the things that we talk about. The specific topic is on tips for students who are graduating, whether it's from school or from high school, from university, whatever, grad school, whatever, but are getting ready to go into the world or to another stage of life, particularly a stage of life where there tends to be less readily available opportunities for interacting with people who are different in a multicultural sense. So the tips are how to continue that multiculti vibe and experience when one is increasingly in life, in the people say the real world, actual world, whatever. But as we continue in this walk, so that's a general joint. I get to listen to all of it. I was actually listening to some of it as I was preparing the audio, and I still have to work on the upload and everything. But she dropped some gems, and it's funny because I'm listening in the initial conversation that she and I have, and sometimes I think we might take things for granted, and so somebody says something, we just say, okay, yeah, that sounds nice, okay, and it kind of wipes or brushes off or whatever else. But when we have the opportunity to revisit that or remember that, it's wow, that was awesome. So when I was listening to a portion of the audio and in preparing it for upload, I was like, wow, that's a nice one right there. So I look forward to listening to the rest of this, although I remember we had this conversation maybe a few weeks ago, about a month ago, so it's comparatively recent, and yeah, that's much of it. Yeah, I do a lot of talking at the beginning again, so anyways, it is what it is, and here it is. Yeah, also one thing I just started listening to it. Also, one thing to share is that the audio on this joint is a little bit low. And that's one of the things I'm working on in terms of the upload. I did the recording on the app, but I stopped it at some point, and I think the continuation joint didn't take. So I'm utilizing the backup audio that I recorded from the computer, the laptop. So it was actually a second hand or a second source type of audio recording, and thus Arlet's voice it's the phone voice. So it's audible, but it takes a little bit further concentration and effort to kind of hear her articulation. So I doubled up the volume on, and then I had to like reduce it from a video recording to an audio recording so that I could upload it. So I'm uncertain what the quality is going to be when I actually upload it back onto the platform. But I doubled up the volume. It seems to be still workable, but anyways, it's just a solicitation for patience. And if you listen to this whole joint, hey, you got some of it already. How about that? So anyways, here it is. Of the blog, or not the blog, but the podcast is just very like natural, casual, informal, relaxed. I don't actually even do editing because I refer to like what I call the spirit of the conversation. And so when there are awkward pauses or whatever else, hey, guess what? That's going in there too. So it's just like it is what it is, and so it emphasizes like the authenticity. And additionally, so that's kind of like the approach in this style, kind of minimalistic in terms of the aesthetics or whatever. The premise of the podcast itself in the convos is based upon my experience of being mélangé, of being mixed heritage and interacting with people from different backgrounds. And I've done things through the years, and recently people say, hey, I should do a podcast. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I'm starting to have these convos. I recorded about half a dozen, or actually probably over half a dozen at this point, and releasing them on a weekly basis. And so I just released the first introduction to the series this week, and then from this point on, God willing, I'll do it each week. So it doesn't, just because I'm mixed doesn't mean every convo is about being mixed, because I'm having convos with people, with all sorts of people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, and additionally, and it's through the aggregate of these conversations that people get what it's like to be in like a mixed experience or a multicultural experience, and additionally. So given your experience in like you say just a moment ago, working with students and engaging with students, providing a welcome and a comfort for students to be at home and relaxed and secure, and to have a solid foundation to pursue their studies, that's what we're going with on this joint as well. So with the general format that I utilize in these initial conversations is just actually to like describe how you and I know each other, like how we meet, to give some context to the convo, and then I invite you to talk about your ancestors, your heritage, and what brings you to who you are today. And then we can get into the topic that we referenced before about tips for students to continue being or doing multiculturalism after graduation. And then I invite you to share a message for the next 7 generations, like the one to grow on afterwards, to wrap it all up. So that's kind of the format that we're looking at. Okay. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, cool. So, Sister Arlet, we meet like a decade ago, if I recall. I mean, I shared this story recently, like in the past few weeks or the past year or so, about like the first conversation that we had. So it might be in your memory, but I'll just say it again, just for the sake of continuity. It was, like I said, about a decade ago, and I was in a certain phase of maybe some rebelliousness or whatever, but I had a certain custom. I still do it, but I do it to a lesser extent at the moment. But I was in the student center, of which you preside. You are the director of the student center at Case. And I was sitting there in the student center, and I had my footwear off, and I was in my bare feet or my socks or something like that. And so there was certain reasons why I do that, but obviously it's very different. It's very unusual. It's very peculiar, and for some it might be disconcerting. And so I imagine somebody called that to your attention, and
Now, I've been in situations like this before, and not necessarily because of the footwear or whatever, but just for being different or whatever, and there being concerns. And so, oftentimes, the initial reaction is, "Oh, call the guys with guns, get the security. We need to get this guy out." And so, I'm ready for that. And when the security comes, I with smiles, and I try to be as conversational as possible. But I'm ready for that. So that being said, you have a different approach, and it's like what makes you so beautiful, because I saw it like from the very beginning. You come casual, and you come right direct to the table, and you were like, so is there a particular reason why you don't have your shoes on? and I was like, oh, okay, she's willing to have a conversation. So I was like, I gave a little bit of the reason why about tradition and taking footwear off when being inside a place, whatever, and then even then. You were like, well, you know what? That's okay. I'm okay with that. But do me a favor. Or I don't say you said do me a favor, but you said what I do ask you to do is, if you choose to move outside of this like table, if you choose to like walk around the building, I ask you to put your footwear on just for safety's sake and additionally. So you were so diplomatic and so gracious and so compassionate and so dignified in your response and how you handle that. I was very impressed by that, and I'm like, okay, this has got something going on here. So. And then since then, through the years, I mean, we've had some awesome conversations, and this session today is just like another continuation, a continuation, part of the continuity of those conversations. So that's what I remember. Does that sound recognizable the way I describe it?
Yes.
Okay.
I do remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So with that being said. I invite you to share something about your ancestry, your heritage, what makes you you, what brings you to this place where we are at this moment, and what guides you in your walk in life.
Okay,
I know it's big.
Background.
All right.
African American, as far as I know of, both parents are coming from the South, migrating to this regional area. My curiosity about diversity started with myself first, and so learning who am I in all of this. My mom and dad divorced. My dad remarried, and his third wife is someone who's white. And she's from Finland, and so they got married. They had a son. So I have a brother who's multi mixed culture, right? And so he stayed in Detroit, and he grew up there, and watching his journey was very interesting. Didn't understand it, but saw so much. Also working in the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and so I was there and got a chance to talk to students and what does it mean as far as identity and how do you own that and claim that and navigate that experience. Then went on because I wanted to have the voice as well as the paper to back up the voice. So actually going to Cleveland State and getting my master's degree in diversity. And understanding it from a psychological standpoint, not as social, because to me, when you talk about identity, it's about really looking at oneself, and it starts with you before you can actually reach out to others. And so that's my journey coming into diversity work as well as this discussion.
Beautiful.
That kind of gives some leeway. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And
anything else you want to know?
There's so much, but we gotta maintain balance and modesty. So, but I mean, now there's some new information for me to process. So I'm taking that in. And meanwhile, I also like you describe some of your what precipitates your interest specifically in diversity, but also, I mean, you have a strong intellect. You're very mindful, and it's not just a matter of intelligence, but there's a conscientiousness with that intellect as well, which is impressive because a lot of people can be smart but not be able to relate to people. But you are intelligent, but you're also very relatable, an empath, but with a strong intellect. And so I wonder whether you can speak about where that comes from, like what you attribute that intellect, but also that relatability, where you get that from, whether it's from your parents, whether it's teachers, or it's just like the culture that you grow up in, or where that comes from.
So that's a good point. I mean, I would say that when I think about who I am and what makes me centered, it would be all of that. It would be looking at my mom's life and watching her struggle to raise, being divorced, 4 children, and having to navigate that and going back to school and looking at her journey. It's also from a religious standpoint, and having forgiveness, understanding that I don't wake up thinking that people are doing something to me. I think people are just living their lives, and then we tend to bump through life, and then how do we navigate those bumps, right? And then it's also through my own personal relationship, having someone who has poured into me. And so I am, a married person, and so having someone pour into that, having children, pouring into them as well as them pouring back into me. And all of that has, and especially having family. Family will push at you, whether it's siblings, whether it's a spouse or children. Family will push back and forth, and I think the more we let people in, the more we feel the tug, whether it's, whatever it is, for whatever reason, we'll feel the tug.
Okay.
If we let them in. If we don't let people in, we tend to walk around feeling that, nothing can happen to me, and usually when I meet people like that, it becomes, you're not letting people in, because you should be pulling back and forth, and in your discussions and in your life and everything else.
Yeah, there's mutuality, reciprocity, and through that we strengthen our experience of balance.
Yeah, and that's where the empathy comes in, because when you allow yourself to be open and people push at you, when you learn to forgive yourself is when you truly can learn to forgive others. But if you're not being pushed at and someone's not challenging you to say, you hurt me, you did this, or question, what makes you so right? If no one is pushing at all of those things, then it's harder for you to find the empathy in others, or to be sympathetic or whatever, in forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then it allows you not to forgive yourself. You wall off, and so nothing's coming in either way. Yeah.
And one thing I tell people is that love is the greatest power that humanity knows. And a lot of people focus on force, about like a destructive thing, and looking at bombs and things like that, and looking at that as, perceiving that as power, but love is the greatest power. And ultimately, love is a suggestion. It's not a force. It's a suggestion. There's the consideration that the greatest expression of love is forgiveness, because it's exactly, we can only forgive after we've experienced pain, after we've been betrayed. So the forgiveness is that highest exercise of love. And that's actually what the etymology of the word forgiveness is. If you look at for, meaning the utmost, give, an offering of oneself, and then nis is like the abode of. So that's like the greatest expression of love. Now with that though, when you talk about, go ahead.
I was just going to bring in the multicultural piece.
Yeah.
Because depending on one's identity and what that looks like as far as the different pieces of who they are, and we all have it, even though I may be someone African American, I may have other pieces to who I am. There are other facets to me, right? We have to be able to look at all of who we are. So if you're multicultural and faceted, and you want to benefit from the privileged side, or the side that gives you the more accolades, then what you're saying to the other side is there's something there. And then what is there that you don't want to own and claim? Is that pain? Is that hurt? Does that make you feel less than? What is that? And so that love is loving all of who we are, but all of that comes with something. And that goes into, I don't want to keep going. I don't know if I should be waiting for you to ask me these questions, like 1, 2, and 3, but I already have them in my mind to, why is it important to, not just love oneself, but love all of oneself.
Right. Aha. Okay.
The cultural side of that is where I was going with.
Okay, cool. So all right, let's get into that. And the one thing I was going to say also on the forgiveness front is that an element of forgiveness is trust, and that can be extremely difficult, because I know a lot of people, including myself, to be honest, have very significant trust issues, if we can use that euphemism. And so it's one thing to forgive and let things go, but then trust, that's a big one right there. And now that's on a personal level and at a familial level. But it's also in a community level when we're talking about communities trusting each other, and particularly after having histories, and additionally. And so That's one of the things that I appreciate within multiculturalism, and particularly at the stage of life of university, when students are still young, still learning, still open to like new experiences and new ways of new different ways of thinking. And so that's awesome. It's a beautiful thing. But then what I've recognized and what I've experienced after graduating, after that stage of life, when people like get into the household life of being married, having children, having responsibilities, having the job, there's the draw or the pull for people to be entrenched within their own community, and be aligned and have allegiance with their own community, and be in accord with the agenda within one's own community, and not necessarily exactly antagonistic to other communities, but just that openness kind of narrows down. And I liken it to the story of the fox and the hound, where the fox and the hound are, as puppies, they're the best of friends and they get along, and they play day in, day out and everything. But as they get older, they recognize, wait a minute, hold up, wait, I'm a fox. Wait a minute, I'm a hound. Wait, we got different roles in this joint. And so it's like we when we mature, we recognize, whoa, wait a minute. When we talk about multiculturalism and going into our different communities, like, oh, wait a minute, when am I going to see this other person again? Like, when are we going to be able to like hang out and this, that, and the other, because they're going to be living in this city or they're going to be doing this. And so what I've observed is the social migration away from each other after that stage of life. And so the premise of this convo is how to keep that, how to maintain that kind of like or extend that euphoric kind of experience of having love with other people of other communities, and maintaining that through life. And so that's the idea of the few tips on how to do that, how to maintain the multiculturalism, how to maintain the kumbaya and the vibe as we progress, and we do become entrenched within our own communities, and we do fulfill the obligations and the responsibilities that we have in our own communities to contribute to our own communities. How do we do that, but then also maintain and honor the relationships that we build at that university stage in the multiculturalism? So with that, I invite you to share one of the tips. Sounds like you were getting to one of them already, that you share.
It's important. Okay, so I'm thinking about college students, right? They're
Right.
graduating, they're out.
Okay.
And a lot of times when they get into corporations or education or whatever field of study they decide to go out to, they tend to think of diversity, inclusion, and all those things that we talk about, age discrimination, aging, whatever it is. But in this case, it's multiculturalism. It's a one-off. I did what I'm supposed to do, right?
Okay.
I am graduating. I've had an experience. I did a diversity class or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day they're on their job and they're working, and it becomes someone calls them out. It could be in a meeting, and someone can look and say, tell us more about the African American community and da da da. What can we do about marketing and da da da? And then that person is caught off guard because in their mind they're thinking, well, wait a minute. First of all, I'm biracial, and who are you to tell me about who are you to call me out on what does it mean for me to be a person of color? And how do you know I even identify in that way? So I would tell someone who is of multicultural descent, whatever you see in the mirror, I would advise you to truly learn, not own, learn and stay relevant about that community. So if you are Asian and white and you look more Asian, I would advise you to truly learn. I would tell students, I would tell professional people, learn about what does it mean to be of Asian descent. Because when you walk into meetings, people see you. However you decide to identify is up to each individual, but you need to know, meaning the person, what they are walking into. Because if they're not aware, no matter how old they get, they will constantly bump up against society, and then they will, at some point, maybe start to internalize something that is not there to internalize or own.
Okay.
And it's important that they understand that when they walk out in the real world. I've had students who come back to me and said they didn't hear the words such as, this is a student who's biracial, but looks African American. And when they were in a meeting, they said, I'm trying to remember what it is. It was something like, we thought you were going to bring new ideals. we thought that you were going to, and so it became all these subliminal messages to one's identity. And so I was the person who said to them, what they were thinking is they thought that you were someone who was of black descent, and you grew up that way, and that your communication, your ideals, or whatever they thought you were going to bring, it was going to have this African American flavor. In actuality, this person actually grew up in a predominantly white community, went to a predominantly white school, and they didn't understand what this people were trying to have. They were like, I gave them what they wanted.
Yeah.
I said, you are absolutely right, but they already had that.
Yeah.
They thought you were going to bring something else, and you didn't even know what the something else was.
Yeah.
I said, and that's how people get blindsided in their multicultural look. So
Okay.
it's important, back again, to knowing one's history, not owning it, but knowing it so that when you navigate through different, journeys in your life, you have an awareness of some of the blind spots that you may get hit with. And you don't have to own it. You can push back on it and say, I understand that you may have, if the person chooses to educate, they may not. I don't believe that just because you are of multicultural background that you need to educate everyone. That's not, you're not put here. Now, if you choose to, you can. And then to the students I had another student who said to me, I am so tired. Now, this is someone who was biracial who said to me of different cultures, two different cultures, but you can tell that you could tell that they were biracial, but you couldn't tell what the mix was.
Ambiguous,
right?
Yeah.
And so the person said, I am so tired of black people trying to figure out who I am, right? He said, I never had a problem with white people. And then I looked at him and I said, the reason why you never had a problem with white people, because if they know nothing else, they know that you're not white.
Yeah.
I said, black people are trying to figure out, can I trust you?
Right.
Can I have a conversation with you? What makes you who you are?
Yeah.
And if I said something about white, will you be offended? So I'm trying to figure out what kind of relationship can I form with you.
Sure.
And I said, white people never have to ask you, because if they know nothing
Then
else, they
they're
know
not-
that you're not all white.
Yeah, and it tends to not to be there to begin with. So that actually reminds me of a few things. I think about a few things when you say that. So basically, like to sum up what you're sharing, or the suggestion that you're making is like knowledge of self, of regardless of where one's coming from, to know like one's history, one's heritage to some extent, and to be able to speak on that. Because that's for anybody of any background. And actually it reminds me of some personal experience that I have. Like one thing when you talk about not knowing oneself and like trying to like invest oneself in the assimilationist methodology, and then like being called out for not knowing about oneself, because like you say, regardless of how much one is acculturated to like a mainstream experience, when a person is included within a company or within an organization, it's often as a representation of a certain constituency, and with the expectation of being able to speak to the experience and have some influence and connections with that constituency. And it actually reminds me of an adage that was shared when I was at Hampton, which for those who don't know is an HBCU. When I was at Hampton, and we were having career days and career fests and things like that, and I would see like mainstream corporations participating in this, and I would always kind of like, it was interesting to me because I think, well, why are these corporations recruiting at this like place that nobody knows about generally in mainstream society? Like how do they know to be here? Now don't get it twisted. There's some brilliant brothers and sisters at Hampton University and at HBCU, so I know that. But the mainstream people usually don't even know what Hampton is, and then when they hear about it, they're like, "Oh, okay." But all that being said, what was explained was that when corporations and companies specifically look for people of African ancestry, one of the places that they go to are HBCUs, and particularly often, to be honest, certain elite HBCUs, because they know that the type of student they're going to get from that. And so that speaks to what you're saying about having that knowledge of self and being a representation of the constituency. And so That's one experience that I'm reminded of when I'm listening to your response. And then another one is actually ironic, is that in my spiritual work, in my spiritual diplomacy work through the years, I keep in contact with brethren that I've had in my school days, and one of these dear brethren is Indian. He's Hindu. He actually he's in the Detroit area as well. He graduated Wayne State. And so I've sent emails about things I've done and everything, and he's like, Peter, yo, you're more Hindu than I am, because I share things like that are very readily cultural specific, that speak to a lot of different religious and cultural experiences. But I find that as people like progress in terms of their career track, there is that influence, while still being mindful of one's heritage, to kind of like be a little bit not speak to it as much, or not be as upfront with it in like public about it, and just like, well, that's a side thing, that's something, that's a private thing. And so my approach is rather distinct. And so I rarely say this is Hindu, this is Buddhist, this is Jewish, this is Christian, Islam, whatever. And he was just making the comment of like, the things I was sharing was like further knowledgeable. Like he was telling me how I was telling him about his own culture, and I don't want to be that like patronizing, whatever. But that was basically what he was speaking to, because he is very much enveloped in the experience of assimilation, and a lot of the things that even he shares with his children, additionally, are kind of pop culture types of things, rather than necessarily the Indian Desi Hindu background. And so. I guess that I'm just speaking again and emphasizing that knowledge of self thing, and actually that's my first tip that I wanted to share as well, was that knowledge of self. And to be somewhat specific, I mean, Confucius talks about this. Like when we talk about what does that knowledge, where do we get that knowledge of self? What is that knowledge of self? Confucius teaches that it is our songs, it is our stories, and it's our rituals. And so it's having a knowledge of that, and particularly again in the pop culture kind of environment and in scene, there's a sense of losing oneself in that kind of the messaging and the topics that are covered in pop culture. And pop culture is nice and it's catchy and everything else like that, but it often doesn't give people a sense of the tradition, the heritage where people come from. It doesn't say what the songs are, the ancient songs, those songs that are over 100 years old, that are over 1,000 years old, in a different language, the language that one's ancestors speak, the stories that come from that experience as well, that are passed from generation to generation, that all the generations of today know, the young, the old, the middle, and additionally that we can all know what those stories are. And so that's part of our heritage. That's part of who we are, and where our knowledge of self comes from. And so that's what I emphasize to students, is to know that. And amidst like vying for corporate positions, or not even just corporate, but any kind of occupation, amidst those tendencies, to have the knowledge of those songs, to have a knowledge of those stories, and to have a knowledge of those rituals, and be solid and firm in one's own foundation, and then to be able to be strongly rooted, to reach out and to genuinely and securely extend branches of understanding and cooperation with others, and to be able to receive comfortably the stories and songs and rituals of others, to have a knowledge of what those are, without feeling threatened. That's it.
So I want to jump in with the pop culture, because it will fool you in thinking that none of it culture is not important. Multicultural, none of it's important. So being someone of mixed heritage, they'll tell you, oh no, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. And one day you graduate out of high school, you go to college, you start to have an awakening, and then you leave the educational bubble. That's when reality will bump up really quick on you, and it'll say, wait a minute, yeah, you are American, but then the titles become very strong. Oh, but you are you white, or are you African American? Are you Hispanic, or are you white? What are you, right? That's when those conversations really come up strong, and students really need to learn this, and this is why I'm agreeing with you about learning one's culture, learning the language, the food, everything. Yeah. Whether you choose to own it or not, I always say own it or not, be aware that it exists. Yeah. There is a whole culture, and it's not just pop culture in the sense of American culture, and what is that? Who defines all of that? But it's also, if you are a person who is and I want to say Black, Asian, Indian, if you are any other one, you need to learn those too. Don't be blindsided by thinking that American culture is it, and then when someone calls you out and they see, oh, you're different. Well, if you're Asian, why don't you know anything about Asian food? Why don't you know about Asian? Aren't you supposed to be smart, right? If you're black, aren't you supposed to know about hip hop? Aren't you supposed to know how to dance? You got both. So it's it's so important that people, and that's, like you said, you need to know. You don't have to own it, but you need to be aware and have a history background, and it's not a checkoff. Again, going back to, this is an ongoing process for the rest of your life. Otherwise, someone can always rear their ugly head of racism or some kind of ism to go after you, to try to cut at you. I've had students who have told me, who graduated in corporate America, and they're out here and they're getting cut at, or why don't you know this, or who are you, or or let me give it the other side. So I was talking to a young lady who's biracial, and she said to me, she was running for an organization that was for African Americans, but then the question became, are you black enough? It's like, what? And she couldn't believe that even came up, because she knows her history, so she was able to come back just
right. Exactly.
And one of the things I always ask people, if you're checking a box, right, what does that mean? So if you check African American, what does it mean to be a black woman? What does it mean to be a black man? What does it mean to be biracial? What does that mean? Have a definition for it. Because if you don't, people will put stuff on you that is not yours to own.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you describe or basically reference this void, or I shouldn't say void, a spectrum perhaps between knowledge and owning. That's something that you've repeated, and so I appreciate that. And actually, what I would venture to like add to that, or to include within that, is some stages in between those two polarities, or those two spaces, which would be respect and appreciation, because it's necessary to know, yes, but also in knowing, like, have a certain respect for it, like recognize, like, this is where we come from, and we don't have to agree with all of it or whatever, or like we might have our issues with it, but give it some respect, because a lack of respect for that is a lack of respect for oneself. And actually, to be honest, it's a lack of respect for one's own intellect and honesty, because there's something to be respected within everybody's heritage and within everybody's culture. And so it's part of self-love is loving where we come from. And that requires a very basic respect of where we come from. So it's knowledge and respect. And then with that respect, I think it's appreciation, because it's like, yo, I come from this. I appreciate that. Like cats toil. Yes. Cats went through difficulties for me to be here. I appreciate that. I respect and I appreciate that. So how we define ownership or whatever, I mean that's further along the spectrum, and that might be to people's different prerogatives and discretion. But I mean, respect, it's knowledge, yes, but it goes even further, like knowledge, respect, and appreciation, and then finding one's balance of where the ownership or the responsibility or obligation is from there. But I think, and that applies to everybody, whether they're mixed, whether they're 100%, whatever. And like you said, when somebody's identity is being questioned at a meeting, then they're persons of African ancestry. Like, yo, don't here. This is what I'm got to tell you. Then you bring out the announcer. You bring on some Mansa Musa, or you bring on some Zulu, and then that kind of shuts down the questions significantly at that point. And that has to come from someplace. That's you can't just pull that out of thin air. That comes from like doing some studies, doing some learning, and knowing when to approach it. And then, but see, that's the strength of our stories, and that's exactly why our stories are here, because it's a shared frame of reference. It gives us guidance. It shares principles and ethics. And so when cats call us out, because like you say, cats are just being protective. They're like, who is this dude? Can we trust this person? This, that, and the other. Particularly if the person is soliciting some type of leadership role, or additionally responsibility. Like, well, can we trust this dude? When we share our stories, they don't even have to know our name, where we come from, whatever else. The fact that I know this story and I'm applying it to the certain situation that is applicable, that says something right there. I'm like, oh, hold up. All right, now we got to listen. All right, what's up? Because at that point, it's not us talking. It's the stories talking. It's our ancestors talking through us. And people respect that. People who respect their own ancestry, that's shared, respect that as well. And so that's part of the thing. It doesn't It doesn't become like a person to person, tete a tete kind of confrontation. It becomes that collaborative experience of like, we come from the same place. We're about something of the same thing. So that's what's up.
And I was going to say, to give a clear understanding, so I wrote down too.
Okay.
You cannot educate others if you are not an educated person about yourself, your culture, and your history. And that's on both sides. And the more, I agree with you, the more you're open, the more you know about you, that's how you can open up to bring other cultures in. So the more I learned about what does it mean to be black, that's when I could learn about what does it mean to be white, what does it mean to be Asian. And that's where I can let more and more in and love all people, because I first started to love myself.
Most definitely.
Once I fell in love with who I am, and when I say love myself, I mean learn to love my history.
Right.
Everything about,
of course,
from Africa to the whole slave trade. Yeah, to say, I'm going to tell a story real quick. Okay?
Yeah.
A white young man, he came to me and he said, Arlet, I went to the MoCA Museum, and he said, while I was at the MoCA Museum, I felt like they were coming after me. I said, I'm sorry, who was they that were coming after you? He said, the Native American Indians. They were talking about whites. I said, oh, okay, so let me just give some clarity what you're saying. I said, what does it mean for you to be a white male? He said, huh? I said, you're in America. You know that you're white, right? He said, yes. I said, what does that mean? I said, so I'm going to make it a rhetorical question. You think about it, and then I'm going to tell you something. I said, as a person who's black, I have to know the good, the bad, and the ugliness of my people. Because society will help me, or society will mark them how they want, and I have to be able to push back on that. Yeah. And I said, and I can own that. Black people can be good, we can be bad, and we can be ugly. Yeah. But have you owned what it means to be white? I said, so if we went back to slavery, I said, and if you were back in that time period, would you be the ugly who owned slaves and beat and did whatever? Would you be the good where you were, was it good, bad? Oh, bad. I said, would you be the bad? Would you be the one that sat on the sidelines? You didn't beat or own, but you didn't say anything. Yeah. Or would you be the good? Would you be like the abolitionists? Would you be the Quakers? Would you be those who spoke out against? I said, because when I've learned to accept my people, all of what they were, then that's when I fell in love with who I was. And so I looked at him and said, have you addressed all of that? Because if you haven't, then that's why you felt that Indian illustration was coming after white people. They were coming after the ugliness of white. They may have even been coming after bad white, but they weren't coming after the good ones, the ones who really tried to help and save and protect the Native American Indian. Yeah. So who are you if you were on this journey? So I say that to say that the more we learn about ourselves and our own journey, the more I can be open and empathetic to understand that we all have stuff, but can we forgive our own so that we can be open and forgive others? It's important that we educate ourselves constantly. As soon as we graduate, continue. Matter of fact, you need to pick up even more books, because most universities, other than HBCU, they don't serve communities in that way. And so we do have to be more intentional about staying relevant within our own communities. We don't get to go to sleep, because you can get blindsided. And it's not with yourself, with your children, with your grandchildren. You have children, you send them to these schools, and then the kid gets called the N-word, or the kid gets called some derogatory term, and then you all of a sudden have to play catch up to educate your child as well as the school to who you are and why what they said was inappropriate. And
I think it's an excellent point and an insight that you share in terms of knowing all the different sides of one's own heritage, because it's one thing to know the positives and the affirmational experience, but it's exactly relevant and necessary to know the negatives, because just in a self-interested motivation, because if one's a leader within one's own community and doesn't know the nasty, doesn't know the ugly of one's own heritage, when that person is called upon to interact with other communities, and then the other community says, well, yeah, but we know about you because of this, that, and the other, if that leader is going to be like, what are you talking about? That the credibility just got shut down the door. And if that's a euphemism I can make up, but I mean the credibility just gets lost at that point because you don't even know what about this, that, and the other. Oh, what? Let me teach you about your stuff then, Mr. Leader. We have to have that knowledge of the ugly to be able to speak to that and explain it and because guess what, cats? Because what I've learned is that there are cats in all different kinds of communities that are specifically studying the cultures and traditions and histories of other communities specifically for that purpose, for negotiations in politics and economics, and additionally, so a leader within one's own community has to be able to know that, speak to that, and provide the other elements and explanation additionally accordingly to have some type of credibility and influence when interacting with other communities. So it's necessary, and then continue to have that respect because I'll leave it at that. But I think go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to comment on what you were saying because the reason why most people from multicultural races don't want to learn about the race that is the perceived as the more lesser than perceived, not is, but perceived, right? It's because they are focusing on what society has told them is the ugly of their race.
Right.
So I don't want to learn about what does it mean to be black, because everything I see with black is negative.
Yeah.
But you haven't learned that everything civil rights, you didn't learn about the struggle.
Of course.
If you learned it, you would really have a different perspective. And so that's why most people will pull away. I don't want to learn about this culture, this other side of me, because that's negative. And that's like, you drunk the Kool-Aid. Now you sitting like everybody else thinking all the negative about being African American or being Asian or Indian, whatever your mixed culture is, you're buying into that. Where society in America would say everything is measured to white. And it's like, no. Who gave them that power? And if you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you just assigned that power. All of us are beautiful. All of us played a part in American culture. We all built this country. This country was not built on them. It was built on all of us. So that part of it, when people don't want to go in to learn the other side, it's usually because they're looking at the ugly and drink the Kool-Aid. Oh, you didn't do anything. Black people didn't write books. What you talking about? Y'all didn't do. And it's like, really, you need to learn everything so that you don't just appreciate your culture, you appreciate all cultures in this world.
Yeah, and I think
I just went off.
No, definitely, and I think it's appropriate for me to add in my previous statement that imperative of knowing the ugly of one's own heritage. That's like after knowing the benefit, the benevolent. That's like kind of like an advanced lesson when intentionally learning the ugly, because it's necessary to have a foundation of that affirmational experience and the redemption. And like you say, so many people have been spoon-fed the negative within one's own heritage that it's necessary to like balance that with a lot of positive and affirmational, and then to like compensate and get beyond the negative BS, for lack of a better word, that has been imposed upon individuals. But when becomes in a position of leadership, it's a matter of having the affirmation already established, having the roots firmly grounded, and with that, having then that intentionality with the advanced lessons of the ugly within one's own heritage. So that's I think is also appropriate to like contextualize that accordingly. But I also wanted to talk about or address the notion of learning about others. And one of the things I did when I was coming out of undergrad or coming out of school, my formal schooling, recognizing that I didn't have the type of interaction with people, I couldn't have the same conversations that I was having at university in my schooling. I would start watching films. I would when Netflix came around, I would look for foreign films. And there's a professor, Kwame Appiah, he's at Princeton, maybe he's at Columbia or NYU at this point. But anyways, he's a professor of philosophy, sociology, or something to that effect, of the humanities. And he gave an address at the United Nations, and it was on the topic of world citizenship. And he gave like an assignment to the students who are in the assembly listening to the lecture or his speech. And basically his assignment was to watch one film each month that has subtitles, just to get outside of one's own familiarity, one's own comfort zone and everything. Watch something that speaks in a different language from a different experience, to have a better sense of cosmopolitanism and world citizenship. So I thought that was a very appropriate kind of charge for young people, because young people like watching films. So it's engaging with students where they already are, but it's stretching a little bit further outside of the comfort zone to have a certain repertoire or discipline. So I took that to heart, and that's something that I do. But one thing I've recognized, particularly with Netflix and additionally, a lot of the films, at least maybe a decade ago or so, but maybe even today, a lot of the films tend to be very... I won't say that. There tends to be a certain amount of gratuity, I should say, in the films. It's either about sex or food often. Now, that being said, there are a lot of decent films, but even then, they're contemporary films, and they're still kind of somewhat formulaic. Now, they provide a lot of nice insight into the experience of other countries, and there's some very beautiful films that I've seen through the years. But what I've also recognized is that the frame of reference. This goes like to the difference between pop culture and the ancient stories. It's one thing to know what the contemporary films are and the contemporary storytelling, and that can be effective in some conversations. But when I've met people from Deutschland or from Japan, additionally, they have yet to see the film, so that frame of reference is kind of lost because they don't even know what that film is. So that's one of the things, the notions about having the distinction between contemporary culture and pop culture and the ancient culture, because when somebody does come from each of those backgrounds, those cultures, they do know what their old stories are. And so the consideration is knowing what those old stories are, the old stories in China of Chengzi, or like I said before, Anansi from West Africa. And additionally, knowing what those old stories are that are very, very well likely that people know, so that when you're in a business negotiation and trying to explain like an experience or a principle, you say, oh, I like this story, this. And right there, when you talk about building trust, particularly across communities, that carries a lot of weight, a lot of cachet. And that provides a lot of assurance to people about, oh, wait, he knows something about a culture. He knows about the principles. He knows why this story is important. That has a significant influence, even when somebody's an engineer or an architect or a doctor or whatever else. Yep. When one is able to relate a story and a principle through another's culture, that's better than gold, actually. And so that's one of the reasons why we emphasize like old stories, the ancient stories. The new stories are nice, they're flashy and everything else like that, but it's the ancient stories, the old stories that have resonance with young, elders, and adults all the same.
Totally agree.
Cool.
That's why I'm adamant about, and I like what you said about movies, because even when I'm watching movies, right, there's a point where I get tired of just watching what society gives me. I agree with that. I've watched movies from India or Indian, or even just people, Indian, Asian, other cultures, because I also understand that, people always say, we don't have enough of something, right? We don't have enough Asian movies. We don't have enough Indian movies. We don't have enough. And so I say to the average person, even people of color, are you helping to support what you claim you want to see? Or are you just giving lip service to it?
Yeah.
So it's understanding that, and don't just, again, to the whole, I like how you're framing it. Yes, we are talking about mixed race, right? But this really can be applied to all.
Exactly, and that's the purpose.
All of us are multifaceted and struggling.
Yeah. That's it. Like this is not just specific to mixed people. This is for all. This is for people who students at Case who are 100% Indian or Chinese or Japanese, who might get a job at a European corporation or something like that, and there's a very strong influence of acclimating to that kind of environment. And so the consideration is how to stay oneself within those kind of conditions.
Yes.
And when one does have friends and close, meaningful relationships with people from different cultures, how to maintain those amidst those conditions.
They'll be real.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, the more you know yourself, and then you start to navigate systems, the relationships will be real, and if they're not real, eventually they'll fade off. It's like I'm going to use the analogy about the sun, right?
Okay.
And they say you want to make your light shine as bright as it possibly can, because when it does, those who really understand you will bathe in your sun. So in your life, those who don't, they will burn off. So you want those who you bathe in each other's sunlight, and you understand each other's strengths. It makes you a better person, and you can see through the bull really fast, the crack. You can see through it very quickly once you become the eye in the storm, and you start to understand the chaos that's going on around you, while you still stay centered to who you are.
Yeah. I'm gonna pause for a second here just to make an adjustment on the recording. So I'm just gonna pause for a second. So the app that I'm using, it automatically shuts off after a certain duration, and so I wanted to preempt that so that we don't get cut off in the middle of the conversation. So now it's just processing at the moment, and I'm waiting for it to stop processing.
Okay. Because I have my closing. You asked me to.
Right. Yeah. That and I want to be mindful of that because I know we've been at this for about 50 minutes at this point, so that's what I'm being mindful of.
Okay. All right.
So let's see if we do this. Ha 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 ha. All right, so this thing is acting up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm recording it through another means, so that we can do that. But all right, we can just continue. So all right, I want to be mindful of our time. You want to give like a countdown of how much we have remaining for the convo at this point that you're able to talk?
Well, I'm almost there.
Okay.
The meeting was scheduled from 3 to 4.
Okay. All right. Cool. 5 minutes. We got a couple minutes. All right. So, before you give your wrap up, is there any other hint that you want to share accordingly?
The main one is when I talked about the eye in the storm.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to explain to everyone when they're having discussions, no matter what it is. And if you're coming from a multicultural background and you're not strong in your voice yet, always use the I voice to only share your experience.
Okay.
That's it. Use the I voice. Whether it's about you, so it's I. In my experience, no one can take your voice away from you when you use the I. If you make it a group dynamic, or you make it anything outside of the I, that means you are talking about me, and I get to jump in and snatch your stuff. I get to attack you.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? But if you use the I voice, that is your story, that is your experience, and no one can take it away.
Okay. I appreciate that discipline. And again, it's difficult for somebody to argue against that, and so I recognize the legitimacy within that approach. Now that being said, I do have like an addendum to that, or just my experience. I'll share my experience. How about that? So I think particularly at a nascent stage of like cultural diplomacy, I think that's very beneficial. At some point, though, particularly because in certain cultures, there's a very strong we mentality. If we look at African cultures, if we look at even like traditions in Israel, and additionally, there's a very strong we rhetoric. And that we means that collective specifically, not necessarily the audience to whom a person is speaking. So it's a matter of like establishing that I rhetoric, but then also learning the we rhetoric. And in that we rhetoric, because I utilize I utilize I, but I also emphasize we, and I'm also mindful of how I utilize we when I mean it in a specific context that might might not include everybody else actually in the room, and then when I utilize it as intentionally an aggregate, a universal sense, I'm very mindful that when I'm speaking like that, it's a truth that's applicable, that stands to the scrutiny, or even that invites the conversation accordingly. But particularly as a spiritual diplomat, when I'm working to build bridges, I very much emphasize the we rhetoric to emphasize the experience of collectivity and being in the same boat. But it has to be done with skill. Gotta have skill to do that.
To navigate that, because I'm agreeing with you,
Okay.
when you're sharing an experience, it's the I voice.
Sure, right.
When you're trying to group, it's the we voice.
Okay.
So, should I share I in the sense of this is what I have experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I want to bring you into my conversation, then it becomes how can we work together to create something different? How can we work together?
Mm.
So it's I when I'm sharing an example, because I'm trying to get you to understand that I see you or I hear you. So I have to use that voice, because otherwise it becomes, you need to share your truth if you want me to share mine, right? So what do you have? Because I'm not going to open up to you unless you go with I and tell me about you. And that's how I get most students to open up. I talk about me first, and I'm not, there are certain things, most of my life when I use that I voice, I'm very transparent about, but then when I want to go to we, then it becomes how can we collaborate, how can we work. Do you mind, and I ask people, do you mind sharing yours, because this is what I'm really saying to them, do you mind sharing your I voice? Can I hear your experience? That means can I hear your I? So that we can come together in communication. But we can't get a we in the boat until I hear, what are the things that may be shutting you down. That's why that ugly thing is important too, right? So I may be I'm thinking I'm stepping on your good, but actually I may be stepping on some ugly, and I need to know, where are you at in this journey? But most people won't share until you share first. And Peter, you're very open too. You will share. Whereas a lot of people, they're so layered, and sometimes with students, I will go there. I will take the time. But for some people, I won't, because my days are only so long, and I only have so much to give. So I have to be careful when I'm unlayering people, because there's been times where I've unlayered, and I'm like, this is way more than I expected.
It's therapy at that point.
So I have to be careful. I'm using my I voice and my we voice.
Okay, so I think that
I like that.
I think that we are at the point of wrapping this up. What I would like to do is actually just share two other tips very briefly, and then invite you to share your one to grow on. So one other tip that I have for students in maintaining the multiculturalism, whatever their cultural background is, in addition to knowing who they are themselves, the knowledge of self. Going to groups, even though the university is a unique experience of being able to meet people from different places, and once one graduates, it's less available. But there are multicultural groups out there. There are multicultural fraternities and sororities. There are multicultural professional organizations, like the Cleveland Council of World Affairs. Here, they have like a monthly young professionals dinner that they organize, and emphasizing international conscientiousness and networking. And then there are ethnic specific young professional groups, and there's propensity for collabs between, like, the Young Latino Network or the Society of Urban Professionals. There's the Motivations, and additionally here in the Cuyahoga area, just as a few examples of that. And then also joining either an ethnic-specific alumni group from one's university or one's alma mater, or a multicultural affinity group, because most universities have affinity groups, many of which that are ethnic-based. And I've yet to find a multicultural specific affinity group, but that doesn't mean it can't be started. So that's another thing of looking for those organizations and just continuing that social interaction. And then the one other tip that I would have is just to invest in the relationships a person already establishes. So when graduation day arrives, maybe not this year, but maybe in future years, and additionally, when graduation day arrives, go meet the parents of your friends, and continue to maintain contact, like make a point to like talk with each other each month, and or know when like the important cycles are within each one's calendar, when the holidays are, and like make a phone call, send a letter, or reach out on a regular basis. Be intentional, know something, dig deeper into the stories of your friends, and additionally, so that you can strengthen those relationships just for that purpose, but then also that you can justify that to your own community of being like, look, this is who I have a relationship with. It's already established. We want to. The relationship is not to serve the purpose of like to have some benefits of it or whatever, but there are benefits that are gleaned from that, and communities are very pragmatic, and so it's increasingly justified when somebody can speak knowledgeably to that. So investing in the relationships a person already has, a little goes a long way through the years, and so that's the other tip that I have.
Hey, great.
Cool.
Oh, good.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, most def. So, all right, we at the wrap up. Is there one that you had to go on for the 7th generation from today to like as we look at the universal guidance?
We're constantly evolving people. We're going to make mistakes, but let's go back to the beginning. But if we find love for ourselves, we will find love for others.
I mean, beautiful. Well, thank you very much for the convo today, Arlet. I appreciate that.
All right, Peter.
All right, love and peace.
All right, you have a good one.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah. All right. So that's the convo. A little bit choppy with the audio towards the end, but I'll see how it looks or how it sounds when all this is loaded up, uploaded up. Anyways, yo, I appreciate that joint. And like I say, Sister Arlet and I have a number of fantastic conversations. This one, actually, to be honest, I would rate this as maybe about an average one. To be honest, and that's not taking anything away from it, but it's just speaking about how fantastic the conversations are. This is just one of the ordinary ones. A lot of gems. I appreciate the one about the light, and finding where we love ourselves and is where we love others, and just that self-knowledge. And I'm also going to add at this moment, along with that self-knowledge or knowledge of self, there's also that discipline of self as well, to go hand in hand. So yeah, very much appreciative of Sister Arlet in meeting to have the combo. And in terms of the passing the hat joint at the end of these sessions. Still, in terms of setting up the mechanisms and everything, it has yet to be done. The receptivity of gift cards is cool. To be honest, my mobile phone situation is in flux at this point. So I used to have Virgin mobile phone service, and I guess they sold to Boost, and now I'm uncertain how much the credits are enduring that I have with the account. So and it's difficult accessing the boosting, so I'm looking at getting another account and everything else. So that involves finding an appropriate mobile phone service. We try to be as ethical as possible, but then also not utilizing money. So anyways, there's arrangements to be made, but that's one of the things of focus at the moment. I'll say also the Cafe Mélanger continues on a weekly basis, God willing, and I've started a new joint of I don't even know if I give a title to it. It's just a verbal rendering of the weekly consideration and the weekly inspiration that I do, and at this point the plan is doing it on an upasada basis, so on the new moon and the full moon. So that's forthgoing, continuing. One thing that we're looking at starting at this point now is again on full moons, arranging a monthly phone call, a Zoom call, and inviting people to participate and just chop it up or whatever. And that's actually what the initial premise and intentionality is with Cafe Mélanger. So Cafe Mélanger was basically on a daily basis or throughout the weekday, but this joint I'm talking about is just once a month, inviting people to talk, chop it up, or whatever. So I'm working on the a link for the Zoom, but again, that's where the phone situation comes in again. So that's where it is. Food is nice to have, to receive, to share. And that's much of it. We're continuing on with some additional endeavors as well. I'll say this, in terms of Mélanger, we are focusing on soliciting local governments and agencies to provide support for Mélanger brethren, Mélanger communities. There are a number of rationales for that, but one is just particularly that Mélanger brethren exist in considerable numbers in many different locations around the continent, but also around the earth, and that our constituencies are without, for by and large, an agency, an advocacy group, a formal advocacy group, and so there's a void. And governments have a responsibility in addressing the needs of communities, and particularly along the lines of social services, and additionally, where many ethnic, cultural, religious communities have advocacy groups that work directly to provide those services and or to advocate government agencies to provide those services. Mélanger brethren have yet to have that type of advocacy and representation on a formal basis. So that's what we're doing in terms of reaching out to governments to provide some type of recognition and support accordingly, and focusing that solicitation and that support towards strengthening the institutional infrastructure of our Mélanger community. So we are focusing on that here in the Cuyahoga area, and working on building a paradigm that is shareable, that implementable in other locations as well. We're still a work in progress, and I just share that as an FYI. There's local municipal agencies, city agencies, whether that's a suburban municipality or a major metropolitan city. There's there are county agencies. There's state agencies and there are federal agencies. Obviously, the bigger the jurisdiction, the bigger the ladders and barriers to access are. But there's still that availability, particularly. That being said, at the same time, when it's larger, usually there are increasingly specific agencies, particularly at the state level, that are specifically dedicated towards a cause and a constituency that is increasingly proximate with the experience of being mixed. So by that I mean, when reaching out, for example, here in the Cuyahoga area in Cuyahoga County, there's Health and Human Services or general bureaucratic offices to that effect that are applied to all different types of communities. But there may be one or two, and then there's family services or educational or employment and this and the other. But again, it's to the entire it's applicable to the entire population. And so to solicit the government to provide services specifically for a specific ethnic community, it requires some type of justification. Now that's at the local level, so it's increasingly accessible because it's increasingly local. Yet the mandate of the office is to the entire population. So to solicit advocacy and support for a specific segment of the population, particularly ethnically based or culturally or heritage based, requires, again, certain justification. It's still very much legit, but that's the nature of the hurdle. Now that compared to at the state level, where again the state level, there are some of the same kind of similarly predicated offices in terms of social service or education or employment, but it's bigger, huger, and so because of that, it's less accessible. There's like barriers of being able to communicate with the actual officials that are responsible for making those decisions. However, that being said, at the same time, there are committees, there are roundtables, there are councils that are specifically dedicated for ethnic-based and heritage-based and culturally based causes and constituencies, and so those are increasingly accessible for this type of solicitation, and it goes further to the federal level, but there are different hoops and ladders with that, and then even to the international level with the United Nations and IGOs and NGOs, and additionally, so we continue focusing on those things, but we're also focusing on the local just because to have some kind of face-to-face type situation, it seems to be increasingly have increased amount of traction. So that's what we're looking at, and how much we can expect to receive. It's not a matter of money per se, or like just trying to get like a handout or whatever, but there's an interest in like genuinely investing within the organizational infrastructure of our Melange community, for it to be increasingly, for one, just existent and formidable, but increasingly also self-sustaining and contributing to the aggregate community. That's a very extremely legit, particularly because it is very much under addressed, under recognized, under supported by conventional society to date. So that's what we're doing, and again, we're still working on a number of fronts, and the beat goes on. And now I'm going to work to get this uploaded before the scheduled hour. So I plan to amidst the determination of the monthly call, the Zoom call, I plan to share that information on the podcast website, Convo with Zuri G at .wordpress.com, and the Rojak Rosdom YouTube channel, in terms of where we share our old stories that we talk about in this joint, and that I repeatedly emphasize. We are uploading ancient old stories, and we're recruiting storytellers here in the Cuyahoga area to do that, as well as with our global brethren, and to showcase that on the Rojak Rostam website or YouTube channel. And the way we're doing it is that we're setting the settings for the channel to be private and only available to people who are members. And the membership is on a monthly basis. And the membership fee, the terms of membership is basically just 1% of people's monthly income. So it's a sliding scale, because that's considered what's most fair. And so it's self-reporting on the honor system, and when people provide that contribution, and then people receive the password to access the channel. We're working on the details of the mechanics of that, and even like don't have a PayPal account for it at this moment, so we're still in the process of constructing that. But that's one of the things that's in the works as well. We actually have a number of recordings already. Some of it's already shared on other YouTube channels, and we're also arranging additional recordings with people other than just myself sharing this. And in the past, one of the things that we emphasize is storytelling. That's a huge art form. It's a huge craft to like master to the point of it being worthwhile. Now, that being said, what we're also working on at this moment, and recognizing the endeavor, the formidable endeavor of storytelling itself, is the art of story reading. And I don't want to refer to it as a lesser art form or whatever, but it is increasingly accessible. And when we already have stories, and so we have written forms of stories already, and the consideration is arranging with story readers to read the stories, and that can be adults, that can be storytellers who are professionals, that can be artists, musicians who are used to performing and giving the energy accordingly. It's also youth, and having that voice of the youth speaking of these ancient stories and building globally and locally, interculturally and intraculturally, with that experience and with that voice. So we're already doing that, and we're putting together onto the website. And so those are some things on the works as well. That's much of it. So appreciation all around. And as I share in other platforms, as I'm continuing to be cultivate this mindfulness in terms of one to grow on, I share that patience is the foundation of all benevolent things in this life. Patience, and anybody can cultivate patience. 3 steps: be still, be quiet, be honest. And when we do that, the solutions arrive. One of the solutions that approaches me in life, and particularly recently, is that your destination is heaven. Your origination is heaven. Your path is your decision. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Mir, Zaijian, adios, te chakris, esempina asamubu, kirle ufred. One love and peace, happiness and liberation.